DND number 5, Angels in Jesus' name. Chapter 11. Keegan keyed his mic. Are we good? Loud and clear, Jason said. That, Jeff answered. Dressed completely in black, heads covered, faces blacked, Keegan and Jeff left the car and merged into the shadows of the night. Moving through the darkness, they headed toward the last warehouse along the harbor, well past where Harbor Street became a dirt road. There was nothing past the warehouse except trees and dense undergrowth. They circled the building twice, setting up mental perimeters. Since the structure was huge, this took some time, and Keegan's leg had already begun to ache. 2 at the front doors, Keegan whispered. 2 smaller doors on the harbor side, Jeff said quietly, breaking the wall into thirds. Ditto on the far side, Keegan said. 1 guard for the entire side. Same here, Jeff said. Copy that, Jason acknowledged. The agents met in the woods at the back of the building. 1 small door on the south end, Keegan said. No guard. We're checking it out. Agent Tanner, Jason began. I know. Recon only. When their backs were to the building, Jeff pulled his gun and nodded at Keegan, who immediately pulled a shim from his tool belt, and in a few seconds had the padlock picked. Easing the door open, Jeff peered inside. A dim light was caged on the wall next to the door. Jeff could see wooden crates at least 15 feet high and an aisle that ran down the middle of them. To his right, there was a door, more than likely an office of some kind. It had a window, but the blinds were shut. There was no light on inside the room as far as Jeff could tell. To his left were shelves and a smattering of broken workshop-type tools scattered across a rough plywood table. A hammer, a rusty saw, a length of chain, nails, a gas can, cigarette butts, and beer cans. Jeff eased inside, followed by Keegan, who pulled the door closed. Keegan motioned for Jeff to go left. He'd go right because he felt any bad guys would be down past the office, and he'd rather he be the one to encounter them. They moved silently through the structure, marking off contents with Jason as they went. When Jeff first heard the voices, he halted, then eased himself onto his stomach between 2 crates. I got audio, he whispered. Keegan, who had no hiding place at the moment, slipped as far back in the shadows as possible. He hadn't heard anything, but they were on opposite sides of the building, and it was a large place. He waited to hear what Jeff had found. 4 men were camped out around a makeshift table playing cards. Jeff observed them for several minutes. They spoke of nothing pertinent. 4 playing cards, he finally whispered. Can you pass? Keegan said. No. I run out of crates here, but there's another office-looking room straight ahead of me. I say it's at the halfway mark. I'm looking right at the door, and there's a window in the door, but the blinds are closed. There's a light on. Okay, pull back, Jeff, Keegan ordered. I don't want you attracting any attention. Wait. Did you hear that? Jeff said urgently. What? No, I don't hear anything. Shh, Jeff whispered. Keegan waited, albeit impatiently, for Jeff to fill him in. He was relieved when Jeff finally spoke again. It's a baby crying. I can hear a kid crying. They're here, Keegan. Thank you, Jesus. The kids are here. Keegan closed his eyes briefly. He was having to fight the urge to go in and get the kids now. He didn't want to wait. Just a few more hours, he told himself. Agent Tanner, Agent Davis, pull back and guard your perimeters, Jason ordered. Jason's calm voice brought Keegan back from the precipice. He drew a breath. Okay, Jeff, let's pull back. We'll keep a visual on the place. They won't get those kids out of here. It's hard to leave them, Jeff said. We'll get them, don't worry. We'll take this place in the morning, and those babies will be safely back in their mother's arms tomorrow. Okay, I'm pulling. Jeff gave a loud grunt as the butt of the rifle came down on his head. Jeff, Keegan whispered. Keegan heard only a second grunt in return. Jeff, answer me, damn it. It was Jason's voice that broke the silence. Tanner, pull back. I can't do that, sir. Agent Tanner, I'm asking you to pull back. 2 dead is not an option. I'm not leaving him. There's a chance he's still alive. I can't leave him, and you know that. Jason sighed. Yes, Agent Tanner, I do. Rising, he began gathering what he'd need. He was headed to Savannah. New scene. Lizzie couldn't sleep. She should be exhausted with the excitement of reuniting with her children and meeting all the new people and being in a new place, but her mind was running a million miles an hour. She was amazed at how quickly she'd fallen in love with Pine Forest. Tomorrow, Jody and Lisa would take her into town and show her around. They intended to visit the club where Lizzie would sing, if she decides that's what she wants to do. If all that worked out, if Lizzie could sing at the club, if she could find a home down here, and her girls felt happy and secure, which they already seemed, then Lizzie herself should be happy. Yet, how could she feel happy when she felt like part of her had been ripped away? She couldn't get Keegan Tanner out of her mind. The way he touched her, the way he kissed her, how tender and loving he was back in the motel room when she'd forgiven him for all the lies and he'd held her all night long. Her stomach twisted as she thought. She rose and walked to the window. She and the girls were sleeping in the den of the Apples' attic apartment above the inn. There was no room in the actual inn, and John didn't want her and the girls out at one of the cottages yet, not without him or someone watching over them. Gazing out the window, past the lighted pool area and the gardens to the darkened woods at the back of the property, she let the images come of Keegan. They came in flashes, him reaching out to her, him taking her face in his hands before he kissed her, him giving his small chuckle, his hand wiping the table, him standing close as he docked her head, the look in his eyes when he finally whispered, "I love you." The sobs welled up in her chest as she slid down the wall and curled up in a ball and cried. "There now, sweetie," Jody said softly as she knelt by her, running her hand over her long blonde hair. Lizzie sat up quickly and wiped at her eyes. "Oh, Jody, I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "No, John got a phone call. He went downstairs so he wouldn't wake up the rest of us," Jody said as she sat down next to Lizzie and put her arms around her. "It doesn't hurt. It hurts, doesn't it?" "Hurts so much," Lizzie whispered. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I love him so much, and he even says he loves me. So why, Jody? Why won't he come back to me?" "Who knows what he's thinking, sweetie? Probably something noble or heroic." "Yes, it is something like that, because he started to say that I'd find someone better for me, and I cut him off and wouldn't let him finish. I told him there was no one better for me than him. Sometimes men are so stupid." Lizzie looked up at the look on Jody's face and had to giggle. She sniffed and used her nightshirt to wipe at her tears. "Yeah, they are, aren't they?" Jody nodded with a smile. "Come on, let's go down and raid Maddie's fridge." The two made their way slowly downstairs. They could hear John's voice as he spoke urgently on the phone. "I'm coming. I'm only a few hours away. Don't worry, Jason. We'll find them." He ended the call and looked up at the women as they came into the kitchen. "John," Jody said. "What is it?" John's eyes shifted toward Lizzie, then back to Jody. He sighed. "Jeff is MIA." Lizzie gasped. "No!" "That's the agent Jason sent to help Keegan," Jody asked. "Yes. He was with Keegan on opposite sides of a building. Keegan didn't see what happened to him. He heard a scuffle, then Jeff disappeared." He glanced at Lizzie again. "Keegan refused to pull out without Jeff, and now he's not responding either." Lizzie's eyes were wide as saucers. Her hand covered her mouth. She stared straight ahead, not really seeing anything. "No," she whispered under her hand. Her head began moving side to side. "No," she said again louder. John grabbed her by the shoulders and gave her a shake until her eyes shifted to his face. "Lizzie, I will find him. I swear to you. I will find him." New scene. When Jeff woke, it was still dark and he was freezing. It took him several minutes to realize that he was blindfolded, his hands and feet were tied, and he was naked. His entire body shivered, his teeth chattered, and his head pounded. And even though it was autumn in Georgia, it shouldn't be as cold as Jeff felt. A few moments later, he realized he was so cold because he'd just been immersed in a tub of ice water. A hand slapped down on his head and pushed him under. Only when he was at the point of blacking out did the hand grab him by the hair and pull him back up. He sputtered and coughed. He was lifted out of the tub and dumped on the floor. He's awake, he heard a heavily accented voice say. Hang him up, another voice ordered, also a heavy accent. He was lifted upright, his bound hands were grabbed, and then suddenly they were pulled up over his head until his feet left the floor. He grunted in pain as his shoulders took the brunt of his weight. Where am I? Jeff asked, his teeth still chattering. You're on the ship. Our American friends wanted nothing to do with you. They turned you over to us. Jeff discerned the accent as Arabic. He was in the hands of the men who would buy the 5 American babies. He was in the hands of terrorists. He was in big, big trouble. New scene. Keegan pulled himself out of the water and moved stealthily up the rope ladder. The cargo ship flew a Portuguese flag, which struck him as odd, but it was definitely the ship where they took Jeff. It was a few hours before dawn, and before the new day would come the big bust. A baby bust. If he didn't get to Jeff before the bad guys knew their deal was dead, Jeff would also be dead, if he wasn't already. Once he eased himself on board, he realized the scope of his problem. How would he be able to search the entire ship, find Jeff, and get him off before Brian Cantrell makes his move? Crossing the river, his earpiece had been swept away, and he had no way of communicating with Jason or Nigel to find out when the action would take place. As he decided which way to head, he saw 2 men walking the deck, rifles swung over their shoulders. Flattening himself against the wall, he calculated his odds. He was one against who knows how many, and he was going to take as many of them out as necessary to rescue Jeff. His mind jumped briefly to Elizabeth, her sweet face surrounded by that pale blonde hair and her big blue eyes, big innocent eyes. He would never want her to see what he was about to do. He shook his head. Geez, he needed to keep his head clear. New scene. The reinforcements arrived. The group included Nigel, Dan McGraw, and Matt Lane, the 2 Ameritech agents who'd accompanied Jeff and Keegan on motorcycles, and Agents Coker and Small, also Ameritech. Also with them, there were 8 more FBI and GBI and backup from the National Guard to handle the ship. Nigel took charge. It was his operation. They suited up, loaded up, clipped on their earpieces, and waited for his direction. The primary goal is to get the kids out safely, Nigel reiterated. Mr. Lee, who will be arriving shortly, has intel that the children are being held in a small office structure midway down on the west side of the building. Be careful. Bullets will penetrate the walls. Outside, there are 2 guards at the front door and 1 on both of the east and west sides. There are at least 5 others inside, not including how many are actually in with the children. An Ameritech agent was taken last night while on reconnaissance, so we will expect Cantrell at any time now. Special Agent Tanner is also MIA as of last night. We wait until Cantrell and the ISIS entourage enter the building. We take the guards out quietly. Agents McGraw and Lane, that's you. Each agent nodded in understanding. We take the warehouse in the sections I've assigned. Any questions? When no one spoke, Nigel nodded. I want those kids safe, and I want Cantrell and the money. Be on the lookout for Agents Tanner and Davis. Let's move. New scene. Jeff cried out. His body bucked. His blood boiled, and when they pulled the battery cables away, he slumped down. Revive him, the interrogator calmly commanded. 2 men pulled him down and dunked him into the ice water. Jeff came around quickly, coughing and choking. He wanted to fight back, but he had no more energy. He'd lost track of how many rounds he'd gone so far. They lifted his dead weight back onto the hook. I don't think your body can take very much more of this. Is it worth your life? Tell us who you were talking to when you were discovered hiding in the warehouse. Who knows about the shipment? Who are you with? FBI? CIA? Jeff didn't respond. The battery cables were placed against his skin. Spittle spewed from his mouth as his body jerked. The cables were removed and his body hung limply. Let me ask you again, the interrogator said, his tone deceptively soft. Who were you talking to? Jeff only whimpered. He was talking to me, Keegan answered, his tone also quiet. He shot the two assistants before they could swing up their weapons. Their leader was not quite so lucky. The man was able to draw his pistol. Keegan grabbed the hand holding the pistol, and they struggled, tumbling to the floor. Once Keegan was able to get behind the man, it was all over. His throat slit. He bled to death within seconds. Okay, buddy, Keegan said as he lifted Jeff off the hook above his head. Jeff didn't respond. Keegan lowered him to the floor. He was alive, though just barely. Keegan found Jeff's clothing thrown in a corner and dressed him quickly. Sorry, Keegan said as Jeff moaned with the rough handling. I'm in a bit of a hurry, and I can't have all that light skin reflecting on the morning sun. In the morning sun. He stood, grunting as he lifted Jeff and hefted him across his back. His bad leg almost buckled under the strain. Gritting his teeth, Keegan forced himself to tough it out. What do you say we blow this joint, Jeff, old buddy? He wasn't so naive as to think he would be smooth sailing from here on out. He'd lost count of the men he'd had to kill to find Jeff. He had no idea if the bust had gone down yet or if the sun had risen. He only knew he had to get Jeff off the ship, and going down the rope ladder he'd used to board the ship was not going to be an easy task. But it seemed there was no other way. Pleased that he made it to the ladder without being accosted, he lowered Jeff to the deck, then picked him back up, facing him. It was awkward at first, yet once Keegan was able to start down, his torso made a natural cocoon for Jeff's limp body. They were halfway down when Jeff's body began to contract and convulse. Okay, Jeff, calm down. It'll be over soon, he comforted, knowing Jeff couldn't really hear him. Keegan stilled a moment when he heard gunshots and yelling. All hell was breaking loose. The bus must be going down. He hoped the kids were okay. Looking up, his eyes widened as he saw men with rifles. They didn't seem to be shooting at him. Concentrating, he kept moving. He was about 2/3 down when the pain exploded in his leg. His body jerked. He'd been hit. Suddenly the bullets were flying all around him, and he was a sitting duck, so he did the only thing he could do. He let go. They hit the water together, maintaining the position they'd had on the rope ladder. Bullets whizzed past their heads. Keegan tried to dive under, towing Jeff with him, but then the unthinkable happened. He lost his grip on Jeff, and his friend disappeared below the surface quickly. Terrified he wouldn't be able to find him, he dove and was greatly relieved when his hand brushed some cloth. Knotting his hand in Jeff's shirt, he jerked Jeff to the surface. Turning Jeff on his back, he swam with him toward the stern of the ship. Every kick of his leg brought pain and anguish, and he relished it because it meant he was still alive. Keegan swam hard, but the currents were doing crazy things, and he struggled. It felt as if a giant hand was trying to pull Jeff from his grasp. He seemed the harder he swam, the farther from shore he went. He was tiring quickly. He was losing blood, and he held Jeff's life literally in his hands. You can do this, he told himself. Swim. New scene. Mommy, come quick, Heather called. Mommy! She turned and ran to find Lizzie. Mommy, come here, she called frantically. Lizzie came running down the stairs, her heart pounding. What's wrong, Heather? Is someone hurt? No, Mommy, come look. Mr. Mike is on TV. Lizzie ran to the dining room where a television was mounted above the windows. It wasn't Keegan on TV, it was his picture. Grams and Jody hurried into the room to see what all the commotion was about. The anchorwoman was reporting a story about a huge bust where 9 people were arrested for child trafficking. An undisclosed amount of money was confiscated. Lizzie knew that amount. She went on to say the incident was directly related to the recent arrest of Anthony Salados and Senator Jack Hartman. The entire organization was brought down by one man who worked undercover for 2 years, Special Agent Keegan Tanner, whose whereabouts, along with Agent Jefferson Davis from the private security firm of Ameritech, are unknown at this time. Agent Tanner and Agent Davis went missing last night while they kept watch over the warehouse where the child exchange was supposed to take place. The warehouse and a ship in the harbor, a Portuguese cargo ship, have been thoroughly searched and as yet have turned up no sign of the missing agents, the woman said with a smile plastered on her face. She directed the viewers to a live reporter on scene. The reporter, a man with his hair blowing wildly in the wind, stood in front of the warehouse where the bust had taken place and the last place that missing agents had been known to be alive. They put Keegan's and Jeff's picture back up on the screen, touting them both as heroes. The story then switched to agents carrying infants, all under the age of 1, toward a waiting ambulance. Then it skipped to the parents of the children and how grateful they were to have their children back, and that they will never be able to repay Agent Tanner for his gift to them. Lizzie turned and fled the room. Jody caught up to her. "John will find him, Lizzie," Jody assured her. "How do you know?" "You can't know." "I do know. I'm not just saying that to make you feel better. I truly believe it. They're like brothers, closer than brothers, and he'll find him." "I want to believe that too, but what if those men have him? What if they've killed him and dumped his body in the river? We may never know." "We'll know." Lizzie grabbed Jody's hands. "Will you take care of the children for me for a few days?" "You know I will, but—" "No buts. I'm going to Savannah. I have to be there. If he's gone, I need to be there where he was last seen alive." Jody studied her determined face and nodded. "Okay, let's get you ready." "What do you mean, get me ready?" "I mean, when they find Keegan and you see him, you're going to knock him for a loop." "I am?" "Yes, you are. You asked me what I meant when I said you were going to have to fight for him? Well, it's time you got started. You're no wimp, Lizzie. He's never going to know what hit him." New scene. The 5 men stood together on the dock, their heads down, their frustration evident. John shook his head. "Well, he was on the ship. That much is plain." "That was definitely Keegan's handiwork," Braden said. "He really racked up the carnage this time." "He was trying to rescue a friend," Jason Lee reminded them. "From what I understand from John, all of you would go to any lengths to do that." John eyed his friend. Jason Lee was in his 40s, but he looked no more than mid-20s. He was an American citizen of Korean blood. He stood about 5'11". His body was lithe and strong. His thick black hair was neatly trimmed. He started Ameritech Security with a few of his students as his agents, while he worked as a consultant for the United States government, teaching martial arts to those who would train SEALs and special ops. As he picked up more and larger security jobs, his company grew. He believed in technology and brought in the best, newest, and brightest minds to make his company second to none. He worked closely with the military, FBI, and even CIA, and had friends in very high places. Yet he was as concerned over Keegan, a man he'd never met in person, and his own Agent Davis as he'd be over a family member. Braden nodded to Jason's statement. "Yes, sir, you're right. We would. A few bad guys getting in our way wouldn't deter us." "I believe he made it to where they held Jeff. There were 3 dead men in that room, along with the other delightful tools. That had to mean that Keegan found Jeff. So where are they?" Tristan blew out a breath and walked a few steps away, then turned and came back. "Okay, step by step. There's no sign of him in the warehouse. We know he was on the ship and got to Jeff, so his next step would be to get Jeff out of there. You saw what they used on Jeff, so more than likely he wasn't conscious, which means Keegan had to carry him off the ship." "Right," Caleb said, taking up the thread. "And even as strong as Keegan is, it would have been difficult for him to carry a big, strong guy off that ship. And don't forget Keegan was weakened from his accident and his leg is just barely out of the cast," John added. "Not to mention he'd been shot in the shoulder," Tristan said. "Okay, so he's struggling to get this big guy off the boat," Tristan went on. "He can't just walk him down the gangway." All 5 men turned and eyed the ship. "He'd have to go over the side," John said. Caleb pointed toward the stern, like maybe via a ladder. They stared at the ladder, envisioning Keegan using it. "So how hard would it be to carry a man down a rope ladder?" John asked. "Difficult. Extremely difficult," Braden answered. "I'd say almost impossible." "He may not have made it all the way. He may have fallen," Tristan said. "Or lost his grip on Jeff," Jason added. "If you dropped your friend into the water that you'd just been through hell trying to rescue, what would you do?" Tristan asked. "I'd dive in right behind him. No way am I going to lose him now," Braden said. "Okay, well, I hate to be the negative one," Caleb said, "but if Keegan and Jeff went into the water, odds of surviving are low." "Why?" "Keegan's a strong swimmer." Caleb, who'd lived in Charleston, South Carolina all of his life, shook his head. So were a lot of the swimmers who've drowned in this area. The river meets the ocean here, and when the tide is coming in, the flow of the river actually changes direction. It makes for crazy movement out there with undercurrents moving back and forth. They could actually have been swept out to sea. Not many people survive a dunk in the Savannah River in this area. Jason stepped back immediately. I'll get the Coast Guard involved. I suggest you organize searches of the banks on both sides of the river. The men went to work. New scene. When Keegan opened his eyes, it was dark, which meant he'd been lying there for many hours. He lay on his back looking up at the night sky and had a quick flashback of being pinned under his car. The pain, however, was not nearly as bad. His thigh throbbed, but that was nothing. Then everything came back. Jeff. Keegan turned over in the sand and raised himself up, his eyes searching in the dark. He remembered losing his grip on Jeff in the swirling, cold, dark water, but he'd regained it quickly. After that, he'd been terrified his fingers would let go and he wouldn't even know until it was too late, so he kept his eyes on Jeff the entire time. He'd reached a point where he had to force his arms and legs to move forward. Pull back. Don't stop. Move forward. Pull back. Don't stop. He heard a soft moan and moved toward the sound. Jeff lay on his back, his body shivering. Hey, buddy, Keegan said hoarsely. You're going to be okay. So cold, Jeff said between clenched teeth. Yeah, I bet, Keegan said. I'll fix you up. Hold on. The pain in his thigh had him looking down to find the wound. He realized he needed to take care of it first before attending to Jeff, or they could both die. Pushing his fingers through the hole in his pants, he ripped the pants leg open. With only the moonlight for illumination, he tried to see how bad he was bleeding. When it seemed only a small amount of blood trickled down his leg, he wondered if he had already bled himself dry and he was really only a ghost going through the motions of living. Nevertheless, he pulled his belt from his waist, wrapped it around his thigh at the wound, and pulled tight, not going for a tourniquet, more just to put pressure on the wound. Next, Keegan pulled himself up to kneel over Jeff and took his hand. He began rubbing it briskly, moving up Jeff's arm. He did the same to the other hand arm, then began working on his legs. Any better? Keegan asked as he worked. No, just hurts. Keegan stopped his ministrations immediately. He'd been hurting him, and Jeff was so cold he hadn't been able to get the words out. Sorry, Keegan muttered. He had to get Jeff warm. He moved closer to him, lay down beside him, and wrapped his arms around him. Don't go getting any ideas, pretty boy, Keegan jested. I'm just doing my job. I won't tell, Jeff said, giving a short laugh, but the laugh released the pent-up emotions, and he choked as the tears came. Keegan held him tighter. It's okay, man. I've been there, in Afghanistan. John and 3 other guys wouldn't stop looking for me. It took them 5 days to find me. By the time they did, I'd given up wanting to live. It was almost the exact same setup, with the ice and electrical shock. As if speaking the words brought it all back, Jeff's body shuddered as he whimpered. After a few moments, he got himself under control. Well, what did you do? I cried. He shrugged. I'm not ashamed. It's the body's natural way to release emotions that are just too much to take. Listen, Jeff, I know how you feel. Trust me when I say the memories will fade, but it's not going to be easy. For days after I was rescued, every time I thought about what they'd done to me, I broke down and cried again. Jeff's body shuddered again as Keegan's words brought on the same response. Keegan held him tight, rocking his body back and forth, offering what little comfort he could. How long? Jeff asked. Keegan sighed. I don't know, man. Everyone's different. I had to get therapy. It took a while, at least a year before I was totally functional again, but that's because I fought it. If I'd gotten therapy immediately, if I hadn't resisted, it would have been easier and faster, but I'm stubborn. I know, Jeff said, and I'm grateful for that. You're going to be okay, Jeff. I'm sure they're searching for us. They'll find us when the sun comes up. I was hit in the thigh, and I don't think I can carry you out of here, but if they don't find us by morning, I'll crawl out of here if I have to and get help. Just think about how good it's going to feel in that warm hospital bed with all the great-looking nurses around pampering you, and they bring you these blankets that are heated. My parents are probably frantic. Mine probably think it's just another ploy. Jeff chuckled at that. They lay silently for some time. Keegan could feel Jeff's body start to relax. He thought Jeff had fallen asleep when he spoke again. I owe you my life, Jeff said quietly. You don't owe me anything. As Keegan held Jeff and tried to give him his body heat, he realized he was becoming woozy and cold himself. He didn't have the strength to examine the wound in his leg and see if it still bled, and he knew if help didn't come soon, his parents would have to suffer through a second funeral, this time for real. New scene. John peered up at the helicopter as it circled overhead. He had been forced to abandon the search last night once the sun went down, but at first light this morning a Coast Guard cutter had dropped John, Braden, Tristan, and Caleb on the far shore, 2 miles north from where the Portuguese ship sat in the harbor. They were to search the eastern shoreline of the Savannah River while others did the same along the opposite shore. Even though the chopper circled, they knew it would be difficult to spot two bodies, both dressed in black, with the way the tree line came right down to the shore. So Keegan's diehard friends searched the shore themselves. They'd spread out and had been walking about a mile when Braden pointed to what looked like a large dead animal washed up on the shore. They hurried toward the scene, dreading the worst and hoping for the best. It's them, John said, running toward the figures. He knelt beside Keegan, placed his fingers on the carotid artery, and nodded with a smile. He's alive. Repeating the procedure on Jeff, he sighed with relief. Jeff stirred and opened his eyes, squinting. John? Yeah, it's me, and some friends. We've come to take you home. Sounds good. Keegan moaned and peered up into a familiar face. Braden? Yeah, man, it's me. How you doing, Keeg? I'm alive, so I guess I'm doing pretty good. I went to your funeral. Thanks, Keegan said with a grin. I knew you were a loyal friend. Hey, guy, Caleb said, looking at Keegan over Braden's shoulder. I'm getting tired of having to track you down to find you half dead. Well, it beats the alternative, Keegan said, his voice weakening. Tristan hung up his cell phone. The cutter's on the way. We'll have you two out of here in just a few minutes. You hear that, Jeff? Keegan asked. Not long now. John patted Jeff's leg. You been through hell, huh? Jeff didn't answer. He didn't want to think about what he'd been through. It'll get better, Braden said quietly, remembering the pain Keegan went through, both physical and mental. Watching him suffer had been hell. When Jeff still made no sound, Keegan sat up and peered at him. I know you're in a lot of pain, Jeff. Hold on, man. We'll get you to the hospital and they're going to give you the good stuff. Jeff closed his eyes and nodded. John tugged at the rip in Keegan's pants. You were hit? Keegan shrugged. I'm okay. It didn't bleed much. That's because you have ice water in your veins, Tristan said just as their transportation pulled up. 10 minutes later, the now famous agents were across the river and being loaded into ambulances, and Keegan was worried about Jeff. He wasn't out of danger yet. He would have both internal and external electrical burns. He faced infection, renal failure, and a lot of pain. If only Keegan had been able to get to him faster. There was a media frenzy on the dock, and Keegan glanced over at Jeff. Paramedics worked to stabilize him. Reporters and cameramen surrounded him. Keegan's attention was drawn back to his own predicament as medics inserted an IV. A female reporter was leaning over him, asking him questions, before Nigel appeared and ordered her back. We got the kids, the money, and all the bad guys, including Brian Cantrell, he reported to Keegan. Keegan nodded wearily. Relieved, he laid back on the gurney and closed his eyes. He was so tired. Agent Tanner, Nigel said seriously. Keegan opened his eyes. Good job. Thank you, sir. We're expected in Washington in a few days for a debriefing. Keegan nodded. I'll be there. Agent Tanner? Keegan's attention shifted to look into the dark eyes of an Asian man. Yes. The man held out his hand. I'm Jason Lee. Keegan reached up to him. It's an honor to finally get to meet you, sir, Keegan said. Well, the honor is all mine. He nodded toward Jeff. And for what you did for him, thank you. Keegan nodded. How is he? Not too good. They messed him up, but Jeff is strong. He'll come back. He's going to need therapy, Keegan said. He'll have the best of everything he needs for a full recovery. I believe that, Keegan said with a smile. Jason stepped back as Keegan was lifted into the ambulance. I'll be speaking with you soon, Agent Tanner. Looking forward to it, Keegan answered. He closed his eyes as fatigue overwhelmed him. The entire way to the hospital, all he could think about was the comfort he'd received from one sweet nurse just a few months ago. His mind and body yearned for her now more than ever, now that the entire ordeal was over. Now that the kids were safe and the organization brought down, all he wanted, all he could think about, was getting back to Elizabeth and make a life with her and his girls. And yet, he knew he wasn't worthy of her. As Nigel had so succinctly put it, he was a monster, and if he loved her enough, he'd stay out of her life. He just didn't know if he was that strong. Yet he had to be, didn't he? For her sake? For the sake of his girls? The girls, he corrected. So what now? He sighed. He'd get in touch with his family and let them know he was okay. They'll want to rush right down to Savannah, but he won't be staying long in the hospital. He'll tell them to stay put, and he'll be home. And that is the end of chapter 11.